Let me introduce to you our instructor today, Caitlin Kunkel. She is a satirist and a producer with bylines in the New York Times, the New Yorker, and McSweeney's Internet Tendency. She co-wrote the humor book New Erotica for Feminists, Satirical Fantasies in Love, Lust, and Equal Pay, which was named one of 10 best comedy books in 2018 by Vulture. She's also the co-founder of the comedy site, The Belladonna, she created the online satire writing program for the Second City. And she co-founded the Satire and Humor Festival, and she teaches and speaks on satire and writing across the United States and internationally. These days, doing it kind of virtually, but you're still doing it. Here you are
still doing it. Yep.
You're doing it more.
Doing it more.
Tell us about writing topical satire really fast.
Yeah, well, thank you so much everyone for joining us today. It's been so cool to see people sign up, and this is a class that I've taught a bunch of times. You just heard a horn in the street. I am in Brooklyn, and you're going to hear some street noise. It will add to the grittiness of this online lecture and situate me in time and place. I'm so excited to teach this class for Pandemic University because this is a class that I have taught to colleges, to women's groups, to websites, to places kind of all over the country. Last year I actually went to the country of Jordan in the Middle East, and I taught a version of this to some writers and performers there to help them start late night shows and comedy initiatives of their own. So this is a class that I've taught a lot. And what I like about it is that the goal of it is to teach you a process. So it's not about like today you're going to learn one thing. It's about today you're going to learn a repeatable process that you can tweak going forward and hopefully apply for a lot of things in the future. So rather than get one idea, I'm hoping to teach you how to generate and have a lot of ideas going forward. So that's what we're doing today. I will get started with my slides here. So the first slide is basically everything that Omar said out loud, so I'm not going to repeat it. Like he said, I used to go around teaching this a lot. Now I mostly sit in my apartment, which doesn't have very good natural light, which is why I'm lit like I am. It's 11 p.m. Sorry, this is the best I could really manage.
It's moody. It's moody.
It's a moody, dark 1 p.m. where I am. So how I got into writing topical satire, I was living in Portland, Oregon. I know some people here today are some of the people I met there. And even though, there were great creative people in Portland, I felt a little disconnected from the kind of satirical and humor writing that I wanted to do. So I had to figure out a way to do it that made sense for where I was. So luckily the internet had been created by that point in 2014. Not sure if you all know that, but I was like, okay, I'm gonna start to learn how to write comedy for the internet. And so I started to read sites more frequently like McSweeney's and the New Yorker, The Onion, obviously I've been reading for a long time, and to think about how to write specifically for the internet. And out of that, I went on to develop classes for Second City called Online Writing for the Internet. The title is very much what it is. And the goal for me in teaching those classes was really to help people from no matter where they are geographically, no matter what their situation is with childcare or like the ability to go out at night, whether or not they feel safe in comedy spaces like clubs, which historically have not always been welcoming to everyone. I wanted to assist people in putting their point of view into a comedic format that could be used and get them bylines from wherever they were and wherever they were at. So that was really important to me, to teach a kind of comedy that was accessible. So the reason that I am going to break it down like I am today is that I myself am not an intuitive writer. I wish I was. I wish I was just very good at things naturally. I am not in really any sphere. So whenever I want to learn how to do something, I've always had to study what I want to get good at and then kind of reverse engineer and break it down to its pieces to try to understand it. So that's some of what we're going to be doing here today. And that's how I developed this process. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, obviously you're welcome to tweet if you want. If you don't need to be looking at your email and checking your phone, I would encourage you not to. I mean, there's a lot going on in the world, to put it mildly and an understatement. And so I think like to really focus on something for 90 minutes for me has been a balm to my soul and my brain. And so it also will mimic the kind of focus that you're going to need to put into writing these kinds of pieces, which are written fast and furious, baby. That's what we're doing today. We're doing a kind of writing that has to be done real fast on a timeline. usually with no distractions because you have to bang out a draft. So if you're able to, take notes today. You can do some of the exercises as we go along. Those of you who have taken classes from me in person in the past know that I love to call on people randomly because I think it keeps everyone on their toes. Also, it's more fun for me to be engaging with someone. So the only person I can do that to today is Omar. So throughout the class, I'm going to be asking him for questions.
Did you just say my name?
Yeah. Throughout the class today, I'm going to be throwing questions at him. Some of them are going to be basic. They're really meant to just like reinforce the concept. And then he and I also read 2 pieces together that were in the news over the last couple of days. And we're going to do a brainstorm to show you the process. And he and I are going to do the brainstorm together. You can do it at home if you want. You just won't be able to weigh in. So that's what's going on today. So what are we doing? So here's a basic breakdown of what's going on today in, fast and furious, again, 65 to 75 minutes. We're going to break down some key terms just so we're all using the same vocabulary. I'm sure some of you have taken sketch or taken, improv, where we might use some of these same phrases, but they're going to mean something slightly different. So a real fast review. And then we're going to talk specifically about topical satire, why it's cool, why it's fun. And then we're going to look at examples, applying some of our terms, again, to make sure that we're on the same page. Then we're going to get into that repeatable process. So you'll watch Omar and I go through it, do a brainstorm. We'll talk briefly about submission and have fun. Yeah, like I said here, I've been inside for so long. Like I really am craving some fun. So would love to have it. Great. So here are the key definitions that we're going to get started with. So first off, real basic, satire. For our purposes, the comedy of outrage. So when I say outrage, you can really replace that with any other strong emotion that you feel. They don't have to be negative. Other ones that I think are good are things like frustration, disgust, especially when you're looking at the news these days, anger, love. I guess love, passion. You can do good ones too. I tend to do the negative ones. Those tend to be my driving emotions when it comes to creativity. But the reason that I put an emotion in that definition is because we're going to be writing from our personal feelings and beliefs today. There's no reason to sit down and write a piece of satire in 2 hours unless you feel some sort of connection to the topic and you have something you want to say. So I want you to be tapping into your feelings about topics. So target. The target of your satire is the person or institution that it is criticizing. So this is important. One reason this is important is because this is a way to distinguish satire from straight humor. Straight humor typically does not have a target. Straight humor can just be, silly dad jokes or, knock-knock jokes. It can be humor just for the sake of laughing and having fun. Whereas in satire, we're going to have a target and we're going to be criticizing them because we're angry at them and we feel that they have power and we need to be critiquing those in power. So again, tapping into those real strong emotions that may be negative. The reason I put person or institution here is because your target is really key. So if there's something going on in your city that you don't like, say it's a policy your mayor has passed, or the fact that the mayor of your city, I'm currently in Brooklyn, is arguing with the governor of your state rather than actually doing things that need to be done. So you might want to think like, am I actually criticizing a person? Do I want to criticize Bill de Blasio? Do I want to criticize one of his policies? Or do I want to criticize an institution? Is it the NYPD? Is it the health department? So it's important to think like, who in the situation has the power and who do you want to be directing your critique at? All right, let's do, when I teach this in person, I call it target practice. I'm sorry, it just makes sense. But I'm gonna ask Omar about a couple people and see if he thinks that we can write satire about them.
All right.
So as a general rule, successful satire punches up. Most of you have heard that. It means punching up at those in power. So Omar, do you think that we can satirize Donald Trump?
Yeah, I think we can satirize Donald Trump.
Why?
Well, first of all, he is, arguably the most powerful person in the world. And he's also, he's also not a very kind person, and I don't think he has any good intentions.
That was so politely put.
Dangerous. Yes, he's a
Yeah.
malignant tumor on this planet.
Okay.
It needs to
Great.
be excised. I mean, satire wouldn't be my first recommendation for excising a tumor, but when all fails,
It can be part of a balanced treatment plan.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
So how about Justin Trudeau?
Yes,
Why?
yes, and well, I mean, because he's the most powerful person. He's a state leader. Also, wildly unqualified and often very incompetent.
Okay, great. Yeah. So both those, yes, obviously they have positions of power. They enact policies and make choices that affect lots of other people.
And as people pointed out, the whole blackface thing wasn't great. Not great.
Yeah, it wasn't great. Again, an understatement. Very terrible. Yes, terrible. All right, great. So I think those are pretty easy. How about someone like the climate change activist Greta Thunberg?
Yeah. I mean, I think she's fair game, but you have to be very cautious. And I don't know if it is necessarily her that is the target, but maybe possibly like a sort of institution around her or culture around her.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. And so I like that example because she's still a minor, right? She is a public figure, but she's still a minor.
Yeah.
She is someone who arguably, I believe this, but I know some other people believe otherwise. I don't think she's chasing fame. I think she's become a public figure through her actions and beliefs. But she is a public figure. So this is an example of where you have to kind of weigh in with what your beliefs are. I probably wouldn't because I consider her a minor and I wouldn't do it. I would focus more around the way the media talks about her, maybe something I had seen in the press. So I would go after an institution or a trend surrounding her as a topic, but probably she wouldn't be my exact target. Now, say in 10 years, she is an adult and does something that I think is really harmful. Sure, let's do it. But for the time being, she would be on the line for me. So I like those examples because I think there's a really clear one, and then there's one a little bit.
Yeah.
You gotta think a little more.
That was a little bit tough.
Yeah. And so I would encourage everyone watching to do the same thing. You'll know, we're all ethical, fully formed human beings, I hope. And so if you're feeling uncomfortable thinking ooh, I have a critique, but it's making me feel weird, or it's making me feel concerned that it could be misconstrued, or this is an important question, would people I disagree with love what I'm saying about this person? Then I think it might be a sign to back off and find a different target, or maybe think about how to change the piece around. So that's where target is really important. It can help you kind of spot check your beliefs and how far you want to go. So the third term we're going to look at is point of view. And this is one where if you've done improv or sketch work, you've probably thought of point of view as a character point of view, what the character thinks or believes. Point of view in a piece of satire, the way we're going to use it, is what the author of the piece is saying to the reader about the topic. I typically like to phrase point of view as I feel or I believe, because it's what I am saying to the reader about my critique of my target. So, we'll look at some examples and go through them, but by the end of a piece, you should be like, this author believes that, I almost said something really grim about climate change, but I won't. This author believes that the actions that we are taking against climate change are tiny drops in the bucket that we're all going to need in our houses because it's going to be raining constantly. So that's really important to get clear, because that's the individual DNA that you are bringing to this piece. At this point, how many people are in here? If all 162 of us right now wrote on the exact same topic, even with a similar target, but we all had different points of view, all the pieces would be different. So this is the thing that I think it's really important for people to remember and tap into, because that's the thing only you can bring to your piece. So your background, cultural, ethnic, racial background, gender, where you're from geographically, your belief system, your ethics, your morals, all those kind of play into your point of view. And that's what makes your piece something that only you can write. I've taught classes where we all actually write a piece off exactly the same prompt, and none of them are the same. So it's really interesting to think about how that one element can be used to distinguish from everyone else. One thing we'll talk about a little bit is sometimes a piece of satire will have an opposite point of view from what the author believes. So it's usually a character expressing what the author would believe is a repugnant point of view. But by the end of that piece, it should be so exaggerated that you're clear that the author disagrees with them, that it was for comic effect. So we'll talk about that in one of our examples. Point of view is also important because that's the thing that's not comedy, right? That's the place where satire could actually say something like really meaningful and make people potentially change their point of view. Omar, I don't know, have you ever read a piece of satire or seen something satirical that made you question a belief or change your behavior?
Oh man.
I know that's a big question.
Well, I used to believe in God until, I'm possibly, but nothing that, comes immediately to mind.
Yeah, well, since I had more time to prepare, I can share one of mine. There was an Onion article, I think it was back in 2000, so 20 years ago. And the title was, Lab Rabbit Strongly Recommends CoverGirl Waterproof Mascara for Sensitive Eyes. And then the piece itself is, I won't even read it because it honestly makes me want to cry still, but it's talking about how it's using like the cheery tone of like recommending makeup, but through the lens of like the cruelty this animal has suffered by having it tested on them. And after I read that piece, I started to check all my makeup and all my healthcare products for animal testing, for animal cruelty, because it just like hit me in a way that like reading a study hadn't, that like this is unbelievably cruel to these animals. And so I always remember that piece and I reread it every now and then, and it really stands up. So not every piece of satire has to do that. But I think especially if you're writing about something really kind of dark that's important to you, it can have an effect on people. It can make them, stop and like kind of appreciate the horror. Oh, go ahead.
Caitlin, do you remember what the name of that was, or if you could repeat where it was published? You know what? Someone's already gone ahead and found the link.
Yes.
We're good. Wow.
My avatar is in the chat. I love it.
You know what? You guys got this, and I'll just do my job with you.
So in the US, every time that there's a mass shooting, the Onion republishes the same article. I might be paraphrasing slightly, but it's no way to prevent this from happening, says only nation where this regularly happens. And they just change the location where it occurs and the date. And that same piece of satire obviously now has built like a powerful point that, yes, we can stop this from happening. We're just choosing not to. And so that's an example of two pieces where I think the point of view like really has come around and help people actually change their mind, or at least like have a chance to sit in these negative feelings that you wouldn't necessarily associate with comedy. So the fourth term that we're going to talk about in terms of topical satire is our comedic premise. So this is the thing that's unusual, out of reality. If you don't have this, you are writing an op-ed. You are writing something that is straight. So we need this unusual thing. If you're writing sketch, this is sometimes called the game of the sketch, okay? It's the engine for the jokes. It's the thing that's unusual. We'll talk about how to get there. We're gonna use a very specific method to get there, but we are not, let me be clear, we are not trying to have people read our satire as real. We're not trying to trick people. We want to be clearly comedic. We want our satire to reflect back on reality, but we're not trying to represent reality. So we need to have a comedic premise. All right. So what is topical satire? This, I think most of you can probably get it, but just very briefly. So satire in general can respond to news and people and things going on. Also your personal beliefs and stories. Topical satire specifically is responding to a specific story in the news in the last few days. So it's not even usually trends, although we'll talk about, I have one example of a piece that uses a trend. It's typically responding to one thing. So right now, coronavirus is not topical because it's happening everywhere all the time, and it has been for months. How many months? I can't remember, but months. Topical pieces about, if we hit 1 million cases a day in the US, okay, topical. Not sure I'm gonna feel like writing comedy that day, but there's a premise, someone else can have it. So they have to be written in a very compressed time period. This is what makes them kind of exciting and also challenging to execute. Omar, how long do you think you have to write a piece of topical satire?
48 hours. Is that
Probably less.
less than that? Hey.
Yeah, kind of best case scenario is like news breaks at 5 p.m. on Friday and you have the whole weekend. Worst
Okay.
case would be like news breaking 9 a.m. Monday because you have till maybe the early afternoon or
Yeah.
maybe the next morning before 9 a.m.
I was never a
So
daily news journalist. It's never my
yeah,
thing.
it's tough. And so it depends on if you have a connection to the story and also if you just have that time, right? Like I've written some pieces in an hour, some I've needed 2 or 3 hours, but sometimes a story will break and you'll want to do something, but you simply don't have the time in that moment. So let it go. Something else will come along. We certainly aren't hurting for news these days. So for that reason, topical pieces can be shorter than normal. So most satire pieces are around like 700 or 800 words. I've seen great topical satire that's like 350, 400. So that's a differentiator for them. And they also can be very highly shared. They're like little flashes in the pan, right? If you hit something comedically that's occurring in the news and it's something that people already have a broad awareness of, and then you're able to flip it or do something to make it comedic, people are they find that charming and admirable and they want to share it. It's a way of commenting on the news that isn't just sharing a news clip. So you could get a lot of views, get a lot of reads. I will say they don't tend to age well. They just will disappear unless the news is repeating. But sometimes you can read a topical piece from even 2 months ago and it's like, what are they even talking about? That feels like a different world. So it doesn't matter. You get the byline, you get some views, you were able to put yourself out there, but yeah, they don't last forever. That's why we don't rewatch late night shows typically. All right, where have you seen topical satire? So I've written down just some examples here. I'm sure all of you have different places that you look at. In your tip sheet that is going to be sent to you with your replay, I have a bunch more sites for you to look at. But these are just some different venues and different modes where you may have seen it. A lot of the writing I do and the writing that we're going to talk about today will be on websites. So McSweeney's, The Onion, Reductress, a lot of other sites that cover like more niche areas. You see them on late night shows typically. A show like Seth Meyers does A Closer Look, which is a satirical segment. Scripted shows can be satirical. So Veep obviously is a satire. Armando Iannucci shows, he was the creator of Veep as well, but all of his shows are satirical. You can see them in social satires like Get Out, Monty Python's work, The Great Dictator, which if people haven't watched, I mean, I'd watch it now. I wouldn't say it's an uplifting watch, but I'd watch it. Charlie Chaplin movie. Books and novels, although it is harder to sustain satire throughout an entire novel, and obviously it's a little less topical because of the time it takes to publish it. Nothing is Wrong and Here Is Why is an essay collection from the great writer Alexander Petri, who writes topical satire every single day for the Washington Post. So it's a collection of some of her pieces, but she has a pretty hard job to do that every single day, and her work is really amazing. And then you probably saw it in school. So it's unfortunate that like most of these are older white men, Mark Twain, George Orwell, Jonathan Swift. You probably read A Modest Proposal before you really had the context to understand it. Omar, I don't know what your experience was with that. Did you read A Modest Proposal in school?
Yeah, in high school. Yes. I mean, it's sort of like the introduction to sort of highbrow satire and the importance of understanding context.
Yeah, and I read it in middle school, and I did not get enough context. When I reread it as an adult, I was like, yeah, I missed quite a bit of this. I needed to know a lot more about Ireland at that time in England. But a lot of people read A Modest Proposal, and they're like, I don't like satire, and that's kind of it. So if you've read A Modest Proposal, I would encourage you to read some more modern stuff, but also give it a read again. It's truly amazing. All right, let's look at some examples. So what we're gonna do here is we're not gonna read all these right now, obviously. The links are in your tip sheet, so you can read them later on. But I'm gonna ask Omar, based off just the titles, to fill me in on some of the different things that we talked about. So this first one, Leaving the Trump White House Mad Libs by Brody Gupta. It ran in daily shows in the New Yorker. So what is, Omar, what's the comedic premise? What's the unusual thing here?
Oh man, I mean, Mad Libs obviously is the comedic premise. Yeah.
Yep, that's it. That's
okay,
all we needed.
That's it.
Yeah, that's the unusual thing. If it was called leaving the Trump White House press release, that's real. Leaving the Trump White House summary, again, real. The Mad Libs is what takes this and makes it out of the ordinary. What form is this written form will this piece take without even reading it?
Oh, well, I assume that the structure of it will be just like a bunch of like Mad Lib, Mad Lib games.
It will be
Mad Lib.
Mad
What do we
Libs.
call them? Yeah, Mad Libs. What do we call them? Phrases? Mad Lib phrases?
Yeah, Mad Libs like set up in phrasing.
Yeah.
So the reason I have this one first is because one of the things we're going to talk about today is one of the easiest ways to get to a comedic premise is to use an unexpected form, okay? So it lets you structure your piece, and it also is the unusual thing. So you're kind of like hitting two birds with one stone. So again, you're gonna look at this piece later. It's great because I think it was in 2018, and it literally still works today. Like the first thing just says like, blank, old white supremacist has left the White House because of blank reason related to poor job performance. And it really like, it holds up today, which is very unusual for topical satire and also depressing. It's sad, but it's a great
Surprisingly
piece.
Evergreen.
Surprisingly evergreen.
Topical, I'm sure it was at the time.
And it also is short. That's one of the reasons I picked it too. It's a very short piece. So you can kind of see like how Birdie's writing is great. She's so precise, but she doesn't need 800 words to make her point. She can do 400 or so. This next piece, I'm going to talk about a couple times throughout the class today because I spoke with the writer, Carlos Greaves, and so I have some more intel. If you remember in January of this year, so it was in the before times, there was the American Dirt controversy where the book American Dirt was published, and people accused the author Janine Cummins of cultural appropriation. She is a white woman, and she'd written the story about Latino characters fleeing from Mexico, and people felt that it was like cultural appropriation, fleeing a drug cartel, and using a culture she did not belong to tell a story that they felt did not represent them. So Carlos had submitted 9 prior pieces to McSweeney's, all rejected, and this was his 10th submission. And he talked, I'll read a little bit later about his process, but so he took the premise of this, which is a white woman kind of representing an experience that she didn't have herself, and he changed it to, as a 28-year-old Latino, I'm shocked my new novel, Memoirs of a Middle-Aged White Lady, has been so poorly received. And so he just completely flipped it. What he did there was say like, oh, you don't understand why we're mad? What if I showed you exactly how it feels like on the other side of this? What do you think the target is, Omar? Who do you think he is criticizing?
I mean, I guess he's probably like criticizing like the literary establishment here.
Yeah, his target is.
Do you think so?
I think it's. I think he's
popular
going after a
culture?
lot. He's going after the literary establishment. I think he's going after people who accept this book without thinking about it any further. Kind of the culture that would allow this book to get a 7-figure advance.
Yeah.
And also the fact that no one said anything until it was out.
Yeah.
Like there's so many checkpoints when you publish a book and no one brought it up. So, I mean, the piece has, I want everyone to read it after this, has great specifics, like the main white child's name is Chab, not Chad with a D, Chab with a B. And we'll talk a little bit later about the way that he brainstormed it, but it's a great piece. And that was his 9 rejections. That was his 10th piece in acceptance. And since then, he has been on a tear for McSweeney's writing topical pieces. So it like helped like kind of break his thinking and writing process open, which is awesome.
And the joke with Chab is that he like attempted to encapsulate like white American culture and just like can't even get the name right.
Yeah, and that like the laziest mistake possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love
Chab. This next one is, it's extremely divisive of you to tell the truth by the great writer Chaz Gillespie, also on McSweeney's. So the form of this is a monologue, and monologues are hard. We're not going to really do too many monologues today because they don't give you a lot to work with, but Chaz is amazing at them. He has a whole collection on McSweeney's that are excellent. This was published last October, and truly it could have been referring to anything in the news at that point. I think what's cool about this piece is rather than responding to one thing, it took a trend And then there must have been something that set him off to make it topical. But it took a trend of people kind of using language to obscure the truth. And whenever someone says like, oh, this is, this is a fact, people get attack them for that. So it's a great piece. It's a monologue. It's really well written. I would encourage everyone to check it out. And then just these last two before we move on. Facebook announces plan to break up US government before it becomes too powerful. What's the unusual thing, Omar?
That Facebook has power over the United States, that the United States should have over them, but obviously don't.
Yeah, it's just flipped. It's really smart because it's so simple. Like if you're just skimming, you'd be like, yeah, the US government should break up Facebook. And then you're like, oh no. And then white woman was hoping to support a Black-owned business in a better neighborhood in Reductress. So who do you think the target of that is, Omar?
I guess probably social media activists, sort of the hashtag activists. Is that?
Yeah, I think it's people whose activism only goes so far. Only goes up to the edge of their comfort zone, which is its own problem.
They have a hope.
Yeah. Okay, great. So these 6 examples are in your tip sheet. I want you to read them. Obviously, we're just looking at titles. But I hope you see that even the titles contain everything we were talking about. So if you're taking notes now, I would write this down. When I study a piece, when I was trying to get good at this kind of writing, I looked at a piece and I asked these questions. What is the point of view of the author? What are they saying to me? What is the comedic premise? What is the unusual thing outside of reality? What is the target, the person or the institution that is being critiqued? What is the form? So Mad Libs, monologue, news, fake news, satirical news. And then what is exaggerated out of reality? I kind of put that question twice because it is so important. All right, we've looked at our examples. So how do you write topical satire? This is my little, I guess it's not a formula, it's a sentence, but I like to think of it as a formula because it gives you the 3 things that you need to do. So we're gonna take the specifics of a news story. So basically the news story is your raw material. That's where you're gonna get the stuff that you're gonna work with. We combine those specifics with a structured format. So a Mad Libs, song playlist, we're gonna get into this, and then heighten out of reality when writing. So the reason I like this is because when you're working with a structured form, you can structure your whole piece kind of right off the bat. So I don't know about any of you, but I definitely have fear of the blank page. So when I sit down, if I'm like, okay, here we go, like being funny, no, based off nothing, blank page, here we go. It's a lot. But if I'm like, okay, I'm going to structure this piece as a prenup, which we're going to look at an example of a piece I wrote like that. I immediately know it's going to have a little intro. It's going to use legalese type language. It will have several sections, and I know how it's going to end. So I can rough out the whole structure, and then I can use that as a framework for my jokes. And then the important thing through this process is you want to take a feeling about the topic, translate that into a POV that flows from your lived experience, because again, that's the DNA of the piece. That's what makes it unusual, and make sure that we're hitting that clear target. So I know that can kind of sound like word salad because I just talked a lot. So Omar and I are now actually going to do this. We're going to go through the whole process. I've broken it down into 12 steps, and I put all the steps on a final slide too. You can collect them then. We're going to look at a news story, 2 news stories that we read on the same topic, and we're going to briefly go through this process so you can see how it works. All right, let's do it. Part 1. Step 1, read the news. Sorry, you have to do it. That is really where you have to start. You want to look for a story that's evoking a reaction in you. Unfair, unbelievable, unconscionable. These are great. I mean, they're terrible things, but they're great feelings to tap into. And you could look at any newspaper anywhere in the world these days, and on page 1, there's going to be a story that hits you as all 3 of these things. So you're looking for a story that, because of who you are and what you believe, is evoking these major reactions in you. So step 2, I always like to do a free write at this point because it helps me kind of organize why I feel this connection and my feeling on it. And this is useful because we're going to have to make that point of view, right? We're going to have to say, I feel or believe about this target. So this is where I start to do some loose brainstorming. I think of brainstorming kind of like this. It's like a little like martini glass, or it's like the symbol from Da Vinci Code that's supposed to mean, you know, that Jesus had children. I just rewatched that movie. It is so bad. So we start like this, right? We start super broad. I don't like it when people start brainstorming and they immediately are like, that's bad, that's bad, that's bad. Really let yourself explore how you feel about it. It's only 3 to 5 minutes. You're not hurting anyone. Have fun. If you can, if you're able to, just like accessibility wise, I would do this with pen to paper. Because again, I think there's something about writing like that that will let you be a little looser, and your internal editor isn't making you delete stuff on the computer. No one will see it, it's fine. I often use, if I'm gonna start free writing, the prompt I use is looking out at the world. What is something that makes me feel mad, guilty, ashamed, upset, or sad? And that's a prompt that is fruitful for me in terms of like tapping into these emotions. But if you have a prompt that triggers them for you, then use that. So basically, if you're, again, you're scared of the blank page, you can either start by reading the news or starting with a free writing prompt. All right, step 3. We've now found a story, a topic. We've done some feeling work around it. Now we need to go back to like our head, right? We have to go find 2 to 3 more stories on the same topic. So for today, Omar and I read 2 stories on the college reopening process. And we read one in the Wall Street Journal and one in the New York Times. The Wall Street Journal, both of us felt, was like so dry. And I got some information, but it wasn't like evocative. It just was facts, which are going to be useful. But then the New York Times, I have all these notes I took, were using just like such, they got great quotes. Yeah, they were using such like evocative turns of phrase. They focused really heavily on like what it would be like for students to have sex in a quarantine pod. So they just like gave you more to work with. That's why you need to read a couple sources. Also, quotes are very often a jumping off point for this kinds of thing, especially in the US right now. We have a very rich cast of characters who use language in a very interesting, sometimes inappropriate way. So a couple years ago, Rudy Giuliani was talking about Paul Manafort, and he said he did a cornucopia of crimes. That is such an evocative quote. Immediately you're thinking like, cornucopia, Thanksgiving. What else is in this cornucopia of crimes? What other vessels can hold crimes? So if you're reading and you see a quote from someone who's relatively well-known or an expert, you can use that as your jumping off point too. So in this first like 10 minutes, we're just information gathering, and we're thinking like, what is sticking out to me? Like, what is funny or already seems slightly absurd, or I think I can heighten off this. So step 4 is clustering. And clustering is, it's basically a brainstorming process. It's like similar to a word cloud. All we're doing is gathering these specifics and starting to, so if we're in the chalice, to use Da Vinci Code language, we're like down here now. We're starting to narrow in a little bit. We're looking for patterns and associations from all this information we've gathered, and we're taking a big topic like colleges reopening, which frankly is too big to write a piece on, and we're gonna look for like what we want our small angle on that to be. So if I told you, I want you to write a piece of satire on climate change, you should say to me, that's impossible, that's too big a topic. You can't, if you sit down and you're like, here I go writing comedy about, God, I'm trying to think of a topic that's not like utterly grim. The Tokyo Olympics in 2021. There's so many elements of that, oh, fingers crossed. So many elements of that that you could work with, that if you just sit down with that in the blank page, that's writer's block, baby, you're there. So what we do when we cluster is, I put the big topic in the middle. So this is my like real cool diagram. Unfortunately, I didn't have a Sharpie, so I had to use a dry erase marker. That's why it looks like crap. In the middle, I put colleges reopening. You don't have to read what's around it, I'll tell you. And then going around it, I broke it down into smaller things that stood out to me. So some of the things I had, and Omar, you can weigh in. From the Wall Street Journal, I had mid-semester pivot. That's kind of a fun phrase. Emergency text, which I thought was interesting, the emergency text system. Dining hall plans, hotel dorms, safe sex, because it doesn't seem like we can do that. Assessments, surprise spring break was a phrase that I thought was interesting. Someone used the phrase bleak calculus, which again, like has me thinking like, ooh, calculus, I could work with that. And then housing lottery. Omar, did you have anything that stood out from Wall Street Journal?
I think the only thing was maybe randomized testing. It just kind of made me think of like, like randomized drug testing at for like a construction job or something like that, like a labor job. So bringing that into like the university, like kind of most elite kind of and carefree career you could have, really, I thought was really funny.
Yeah, and if there's a time in my life I would not laugh at, it would have been while I was in college. Okay, so that's the Wall Street Journal story. I found some stuff, but nothing was standing out to me as like
not too much
the detail. Then I went to the New York Times story. At this point, my dry erase marker ran out, so I had to use regular pen. See, you have to keep going over these obstacles. They had great things in here. So they called it a young, impulsive population, which I loved.
Yes.
There were several things in here that implied to me a form the piece could take. So they implied the structure my piece could use. Codes of conduct, an honor code, a contract with the students, a social contract, and a behavior code were all mentioned in this story. So to me, I'm like, ooh, maybe I'm gonna write like a real wild behavior code that people are gonna be asked to sign. Maybe I could do a code of conduct or an honor code. I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but you start to kind of phrase titles like an honor code for real fun, safe sex in fall 2020. Like imagine a college administration putting out an honor code for safe sex, how awkward that would be, how unbelievably unsexy it would be. I think there's a lot of fun that you could have there. What else stood out to you in that one, Omar?
Oh, right in the first sentence, I thought was like the entire premise kind of could hinge on this one sentence that college students were, going back to college, hoping for something resembling a normal campus life. And so, I thought like maybe trying to like write something from the premise of a student trying really hard to make this thing resemble this fantasy of a campus life that they had in mind. And
I love that.
I thought that could be like one premise, but a lot of things stood out for me. The impulsivity, obviously like sex and sneaking into your partner's dorm room, but also like maybe trying to be like a good citizen, at the same time, like trying to get away with things, but also ensure the health and safety of others.
Yeah, I love citizenship, like trying to like define this as like be a good citizen, like by having sex like this.
Yeah. And I mean, my memory of campus life is that is a lot of these like crushes from afar, like you see someone across the quad or like you pass by them and then suddenly you got feelings for them, but like how that would change if everyone had masks on their face and how difficult it might be to try to track that person down on in the halls or on campus again.
So that's like a misconnection, right? Like
yeah,
a misconnection.
Exactly.
You were wearing a Batman mask. I was wearing a Bane mask. Like, so okay, great. So it probably took each of us 10 minutes to read those stories, and even right there, that was about 3 minutes between the two of us. And like, I know we can write some great stuff based off that. So clustering should be fun. Like it's where you're like, oh, what is weird about this to me? Like that expert used the strangest phrase. One of the phrases I pulled out, someone said, I think there'll be love in the pod. And I was like, love in the pod? That sounds like a reality TV show.
Lots of potential with the pod there.
Yeah, a lot of use of pod in weird ways.
Creating like social pods and, I mean, if you've ever been put in like a class group for like group work and you're just so disappointed with your group and you wish you were in another group and sometimes someone tries to take over the group and lead the group and there's a little bit of a power dynamic there. So I could imagine someone trying to like be the leader of the pod.
Yeah, there's great stuff with pods. So let's move on. So those are the first 4 steps. Literally, those can take you 15 to 20 minutes. And that's like where we're getting a lot of the stuff that we'll use later in our jokes. So don't skimp on your clustering. When I teach this class online, I have students show me their cluster. because very often I can go back and like reverse engineer why the piece is struggling. If I see that like they didn't have enough there, or like one of the leaps they made based off the cluster like wasn't logical. So it's also a way to check your work, right? All right, let's do it part 2. So step 5 is you want to start thinking about who is the target and your point of view for this piece. Again, we're going to phrase this I feel or I believe. Your point of view is evolving. If you get to the end of the piece and it's shifted slightly, that's fine. However, if you start writing the piece and you feel that now it's reflecting a point of view that you don't personally hold, you need to stop and go back to the stage and redo it. So your point of view, you never want to be putting out a piece that you feel does not represent what you believe. I don't personally believe people should be publishing satire under pseudonyms unless like they could lose their job and they want to like flame their employer. I'm actually all for that. I love it. Because I think if you know your name is on this, you're really going to check that point of view. You're really going to want to make sure that it's clear and that you cannot be willfully misunderstood. So I still to this day will write my point of view across the top of my document, just so I'm clear like what my joke should be aiming for. And I'm not like, you might sometimes see like a nice juicy joke and you want it in there so bad, but it's off the point of view. It's representing another belief and you have to cut it. I just want to share the title of one piece that was written on this topic of school openings because it has a clear target. It was called A Message from Your University's Vice President for Magical Thinking by Juliana Gray and McSweeney's. So obviously her target there is the administration, specifically the people high up in the administrations at colleges, and the fact that they're using magical thinking to guide what's going to happen. So she's a great writer, Juliana Gray. She writes a lot about college administration. They're very, very funny pieces if you have ever worked at a college or been frustrated by higher ed, which would be a lot of us. Okay, great. So next, you're going to choose your format. So when I do my cluster, I actually will star or circle or write things out in caps that I think suggest a format to me. Because again, you're brainstorming and you're getting details, but you know, you come across the word cornucopia and you're like, oh, I love it. Social contract, that can be your structure. This is something that I actually keep a running list of in a Google Doc. I literally just have a list of like 300 different forms that a piece could take. I think beginning writers in topical satire will very often go to a monologue because they think that's easiest, because it's like, okay, I know how to write a monologue. It's someone speaking. No, hardest, because there's no internal structure to a monologue. You need to build it yourself. Whereas if you're doing a prenup, you're doing, you know, an email chain, you know, the email chain will get like devolved more and more and more. If you've ever been on a reply all at an office, like the longer it goes on, the worse it gets. So picking a format, again, it can be the unusual thing. It also lets you like see what the shape of the piece is going to be. So Omar, does that make sense? Yeah, you're on mute.
Sorry, I had to
Okay,
unmute
cool.
myself there. Yes, it does make sense.
Okay, great. Also here you can think, is there a character that you could potentially use? So like here I was thinking like a dean, a provost, a student. I love, Omar, that you had like the leader of the pod idea. Again, like you could be writing in someone's voice while still using a structured format. It could be this, you know, my normal campus life by blank, the student's name, and that could be part of the title. And then just seeing that, we know that like my normal campus life fall 2020 by blank Omar Moala. Like we know that piece is not going to be normal. Nothing about that is going to be normal. But we know that it's going to be from the voice of this student and their point of view on what's going on. So I would encourage all of you to keep a running doc of forms, because sometimes after I do my cluster, I open up my doc and I see if I can matchmake any of them. It's like, okay, well, this is about Bon Appetit and the firings. Like I have recipes, I have blog posts, I have, you know, a taxonomy of kitchen spices in my forms. Like, can I combine any of them to start to make some titles? because that's what we're going to do next. Is we're going to try to create some titles that have our form in them and that have our comedic premise in them, the unusual thing. This conceptual stage is the most important part of writing topical satire. By the time you actually get to writing the piece, it should be fun. But here is where you really need to lock it in and be clear. All right.
Caitlin, can I quickly interrupt you here?
Yep.
You had mentioned, having this document with the different formats in there. Is that something that you would be able to share with us, please? Or is that
I'm going to say no, because the reason is you will get benefit from making it yourself.
Okay.
Because in order to be able to access it quickly and do that matchmaking of topics, you kind of have to organize it in a way that makes sense to you. So mine is organized by all spoken forms, written forms on the internet, older written forms. I listed some examples in the previous slide. You can write those down, but I would really encourage you to do it yourself. I typically love to provide all documentation, but I'm going to have to politely decline.
Okay.
All right, step 7. So we're more than halfway done here. This is where you're going to start to form potential titles for the piece. And again, you're a beginning writer. You're like, oh, I just crushed my brainstorm. You're going to want to take the first title you come up with. Please don't. Because we want to be coming up with, I usually say a list of 10. I don't always get to 10, but the goal is to come up with a variety of takes on the idea and not just choose the top of mind one. Because if it's top of mind for you, it's typically top of mind for other people. So several years ago, when Donald Trump called Kim Jong-un Little Rocket Man, Omar, what is the very first place your mind goes in terms of a creative premise?
Obviously.
Yes. So we all messed around on Twitter and did Elton John dictator jokes. And if you had published a piece using that premise, it would have felt dated because that was top of mind for all of us. But, I don't know how you would say you go with Bicentennial Man, or you riff off it in some other way that Robin Williams movie from the 90s. You find another thing that's not so top of mind that still works with that ridiculous moment in the news. But yeah, if you immediately have an idea and you can say okay, this idea is from my lived experience. I actually don't think that's top of mind for everyone. That's different. I'll say one of the great things about this kind of writing is you do sometimes have lightning bolts and they feel so good and you can execute them really quickly. But when you're getting going, let's form a bunch of different ones. So this is an example of a piece that I wrote in 2017, I think. And the very first time, this has now happened numerous times, but the very first time that Donald Trump tried to take Melania's hand on a runway and she batted it away. And people were like, what is going on? That was so weird. And sometimes a comedic premise can come from asking a question. I was like, what would make someone not hold their spouse's hand? And from that, the next question I had was, what is something that governs the laws of marriage? And from there, I had a lightning bolt. I was like, oh, a prenup. That's my format. So what I did next was I looked at one prenup. I didn't even read it. I looked at it in Google Images just to see what the parts of it were. I quickly structured out the piece and I chose to just focus on one specific section. This is the comedic premise, that it only focuses on hand-holding. So the piece is 500 words long. I wrote it in an hour. And it's silly. It's using legalese type language to talk about when they would and would not hold hands in their marriage. And at one point, the way I heightened it was there was a clause saying if one member of the marriage becomes president, hand-holding has to increase 500% for public appearances. And then that helped me kind of escalate out of reality. So the whole thing started, is it unbelievable that there could be a prenup about hand-holding? I'm sure maybe one exists, but that's the most normal thing that should happen in the piece. From there, everything should get bigger and bigger and more absurd. So, okay, you form some titles that have the format, your comedic premise. I've written down a few more here of titles just using different formats. So there was a piece on McSweeney's this week called Bartleby, the School Superintendent, A Story of Reopening by C.B. McClintock. So that's obviously a parody of Bartleby the Scrivener. And so it uses the structure of that type of writing to structure it. During the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, Alexandra Petrie at the Washington Post had written a piece called Some Interpersonal Verbs Conjugated by Gender. So she used different sentences and their conjugations, and her point of view was that because of the gender of Christine Blasey Ford and Brett Kavanaugh, there were differences in how people were talking about them. So that's a really powerful piece. It's very upsetting, actually. This is a piece from June of this year, Diversity Fellowship Accepting Applications for the Next 5 Minutes by Ron Metellus. And I love that one because the format is diversity fellowships. It's going to take the form of, it's applications. It's going to take the form of an application. You know from the title, the unusual thing is that it's taking applications for the next 5 minutes. So that's unusual. You could probably guess his point of view is that like corporations will do literally the least in order to appear diverse with the least amount of work. It might be slightly different, but that's what I would take from that. And the piece again is quite short, but he has the ability to get amazing jokes in there. I would really recommend people read it. The last one I want to mention is an important day in topical satire history. It was April 24th, 2020, the day following Donald Trump's press conference when he said people should inject bleach to help with the coronavirus. The next day, Eric Thomas, who's a topical columnist for Elle, who writes great stuff, he wrote a topical piece just called Loud Person Has Bad Idea, which is a great title. And it's written like a monologue. It's, it's a very, very funny piece, but it's a classic format. But that's the very first time that Sarah Cooper went viral with her TikTok performances of Trump's press releases. So Sarah Cooper is a comedian. She's an author. She's great.
She's a former student of yours.
Former student of mine.
We're going to tell you about that, but I'll do it for you.
She's fantastic. And so they took exactly the same thing. And Eric Thomas wrote a very funny online piece that's Loud Person Has Bad Idea. It's a great title. And Sarah Cooper took a format she'd already been experimenting with, and she turned it into a piece of visual comedy. The New Yorker or the New York Times described it as like a moving political cartoon, which is interesting. So the same thing inspired two people to do two completely different things. So you don't have to worry about being the only person to read a story. In fact, the fact that everyone saw that press conference helped both of them in terms of the audience of their piece. I went back and looked at McSweeney's, interestingly, and they didn't hit that topic at all. They talked about PPP loan disbursement. So the sites don't always cover the same thing, but it's interesting after the fact to go back and check to see if you can see 3 different takes on the same topic. All right, so step 8. So now we've been doing this for like maybe 30 minutes or so. It would probably be faster for you to do this than for me to explain the process. So in step 8, what I want you to do is test some of these premises. Yes, like you should work hard and you shouldn't always give up if something's not easy right away. However, for this kind of writing, if you're having a hard time writing 1 or 2 jokes, chuck that premise. You don't have time and it's not coming to you intuitively. Get rid of it. That's why we have our cluster. You can go back to that. That's why you have all the titles. You can go back to one of them. So quickly just start to write out some of the things that you think are funny. Again, this is going to be influenced by your point of view, your target, and also your experience with this topic. So when I think about colleges reopening, my experience with that is I was a college student. I was a college professor for a while. I went to graduate school. I have some strong thoughts about college administration. All those things are going to be coming to bear when I choose my target and point of view. Omar, what is your experience with college in universities?
So I never went to college, dropped out before my second year, and decided to create a fake university instead. So I just want to preface with that.
Yep.
But
that's totally different than mine.
My experience is being really, really wistful about other people's kind of romantic experiences. Not like, well, romantic, but also just sort of the romantic notions of a campus life. And so that's sort of my experience. To me, college, that campus life was something that I really regretfully missed out on.
Well, that's so interesting to me because that's why you proposed that idea of like my normal campus life. Like you wanted to write, like not to psychoanalyze you, but you wanted to write something where you could imagine this ideal experience, except it will not be ideal. But the interesting thing is you don't have anything to compare it to.
No,
So
I mean, I still think about going back to
yeah,
university at 35 years old and just like, wouldn't that be nice? But then I would be like, I'd be the 35-year-old guy on campus, like trying to have the experience that all the 20-year-olds are having.
I
So,
mean, it would
I mean,
be very funny.
that's another article, but
Yeah, it'd be funny if you picked this fall to do it. You're like, perfect fall. You're like,
all
we're
right,
all gonna
guys,
have to
there's
wear
the
masks.
party.
Yeah, there's no party, so you don't have to feel outcast. You're like, I am the leader. I am the alpha of this pod. I am 35.
Wash
All
your
right,
hands, everyone.
great. All right, so forming titles. So like I just formed, like we talked a little bit about it over here. Going back to my cluster, like the phrase bleak calculus, like honestly, you could do a piece of just bleak calculus problems that will be taught in fall 2020. That is a piece that will give you the structure. You're gonna use like, or word problems. I didn't actually ever take calculus. I'd have to go to word problems. Bleak word problems that will be taught in the fall of 2020. Omar, what will the form of that piece look like?
Um, I don't know. I'm going to pass on this one.
Word problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
I wrote a piece using word problems in 2015 during the Brock Turner case because, so Brock Turner is a rapist. He has been convicted of it. I wrote about several pieces about him, but I noticed that like they kept bringing up like numbers in their discussion of him, that like it was only 20 minutes, his swim times. And so I was like, I'm gonna write some like math word problems to discuss why this is not okay. So things I noticed in the case itself actually influenced how I shaped the piece. Like there were things like, if Brock Turner can swim a 500 freestyle in 4:37, why does that matter when he was caught actually sexually assaulting someone? So that was one of the harsher ones. But so you want to like look at the things again that can apply the format of the piece. So I roughed out a couple titles that would work for me. A choose your own adventure syllabus for fall 2020. I think you could structure that piece out where like my point of view on that would be, in the absence of clear guidance, literally everyone has to make their own choices. So that's why that form appealed to me. I also, like I was in college when they were just starting to test like the emergency alerts, like you get those emergency texts. So fall 2020 preloaded alerts into the university emergency text system. And just the idea that like some admin has to be like, what could go wrong? I'm just gonna, I actually might write that piece. I think it's a good idea. Like I'm gonna have to write 30 text messages kind of like preparing for any emergency. Like the coronavirus has become self-aware and run out of a student's body and now is in Dawson Hall. Don't go to Dawson Hall. And so like those were two things that stood out to me, and I can write those pieces. Like I could think of jokes to them right away. I felt like I could get into flow with them. Omar, I don't want to put you on the spot because I didn't tell you to do this, but did any of them occur to you?
No, I mean, just riffing off of what you just said, I was just thinking about like an alert about news that, you know, that a couple had sex outside of their pod, that there was some sex outside the pod.
Mm-hmm.
Putting
and like, but imagine getting that and like with everyone's names in it. And it's like Josie Dawson, same name. I guess her parents owned the dorm. Josie Dawson, 19, and Jim Tarrington from separate pods. Like, and then you can like expand out like, and the kind of the comedic thing is you're going to use that really spare language of an emergency text. Mm-hmm. I also think you could probably write it all in caps.
Right.
So you get alert, sex has been had outside of pod 4. I think that can be super funny. Yeah, and again, I think all of us would write that piece slightly differently. So I want to read a quote here from Carlos Reeves. He wrote that piece on American Dirt, his novel, Memoirs of a Middle-Aged White Lady. He said, "Another big thing I made an effort to do with this piece was to hold off on writing the actual piece as long as possible, since I've noticed that once I start writing, I get too invested in what I have on paper, and it becomes hard for me to rewrite. So I made sure that I had as many individual jokes as possible before putting the actual piece together." So that's what we're doing with this brainstorming, is we're collecting ideas for jokes. like when I think about my emergency text system, I'll look back at my cluster, I'll see dining halls on here, and I'll remember like, okay, one of these should be about something happening in the dining hall. So this is how you do it. Like, you've already generated the material at this point, and now we're organizing it. Like, I know that's not as sexy as like you're sitting down and just like writing beautiful comedy, but you already did the work. You're organizing your jokes now. Another thing I would recommend at this point, and I don't always do this, but some people find it useful, is once you have the title, just make 2 lists. So for me, one list would be college specifics. The other list would be coronavirus specifics. And you start to see, again, where you can match make between them. You're like, coronavirus spreads through like aerosol, like air conditioning. And then I remember when I was in college, I had a very bad window unit. So, you know, maybe there's something I can do there with like my window unit gets coronavirus. I don't know. But you just want to, again, like create a bunch of specifics and see if you can join them together. All right, we have 4 steps left. So step 9, we obviously are not going to write the entire piece right now, although we kind of already roughed out some of our jokes. So you want to heighten out of reality when writing. Obviously, I truly hope no university is going to be sending out emergency text messages if people have sex outside of their pod. So that's outside of reality. So then we want to get even bigger by then. So my point of view is that universities are going to try to use administration to fix problems that just cannot be fixed by administration. I'm going to want to like mix in things about, you know, forms and meetings and just different procedures that people are supposed to be following in these text messages. So one way that I can get more and more absurd and heightened is to think about, you know, what is like, okay, they have a text message system. What is even more like administrative than that? They have a, you know, a phone tree that everyone has to call. So maybe the text message is like, you know, blank in pod 3 coughed 4 times this morning. Everyone activate your phone trees. That's also funny because it's like old school. You don't have to do that now. So I would think about like how each one can be slightly more ridiculous than the last. One thing that I recommend people do here is if you take a piece you really like, I would drag it into a Word doc. And what I do is I highlight all the things that are heightened and outside of reality. So it helps you see that like a piece will start out somewhat grounded, like they'll be explaining how the university text message system works. Maybe the first one is like somewhat normal. And then from then on, like I would be highlighting things like, you know, the pod, the dining hall, the air conditioner having coronavirus. I would be putting all those things into red. And that helps you see that most pieces by the end they start almost completely grounded and they end almost completely absurd. So it's a way to see visually, for those of you who are visual learners, good for you, that things are heightening. They're getting bigger as you go. So that's an exercise that I would recommend to people. I also put that in the tip sheet. Once you do that for 4 or 5 pieces that you admire, you'll be like, okay, there's a way to do this. I see it. Again, you still want to have a mix of normal to absurd, but we want to see some weird stuff. We want to get outside of reality. This is the fun stuff. So one final quote from Carlos and his piece. That said, after brainstorming, I felt like I had a lot of ideas, but had no idea how to put it all together. Okay, I appreciate his honesty. I'd written some long, wordy paragraphs to try to sew all the ideas I had together, but I was worried I wouldn't have enough joke density. So I grouped all the cultural inaccuracies together as a list, and that's when things sort of clicked into place. Once I did that, I was able to separate out the other ideas that I felt had to be their own paragraphs, like the part about the Latino celebrity endorsements, the research, and the if not me, then who bit, then added an intro. So obviously that will make a little more sense once you read the piece, but he's basically talking about what we're talking about here. He's talking about organizing his jokes into a way that makes sense and giving them a structure that allows them to heighten. So again, this is where we want to check our point of view and make sure we're not throwing in random jokes. If in the middle of my text message piece, I had a joke about how like the NCAA should pay their student athletes, that isn't probably close enough to like my exact target. And so while I might write like a really good joke, like really bashing the NCAA, that's not really something that belongs in this piece. I could certainly write another piece on that. So I look at it like this. Like, this is not like the coolest, you know, the coolest little graphic, but you can think of it as like the ties on a football, right? So if the long one down the middle is the point of view of your piece, the jokes have to lie on the spine. So if you write a joke that's like pretty good, but it's off to the side, in your editing process, you're gonna cut that joke. Okay, so step 10, we're like 40 minutes in at this point, probably. We're like doing it, we have a lot of adrenaline, we're feeling good. You wanna finish the draft. You have to do this in one sitting. I have heard tell of some people who don't do it in one sitting, but you're writing with urgency, you know, you're writing based off this initial idea, you're writing based off a unified concept. Please, I beg of you, it will be so much easier if you just finish the draft. Even if it sucks, just get everything down. Even if it's only 300 words long, if it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, get it down. Because that will let you edit with so much more ease than if you write half of it and you're like, okay, the only part I have left is like the part where most of the jokes are. That's going to be a challenge. Let's see. All right. So step 11, these are our last two steps. Create mental space so you can edit. I typically don't always have time to get a read on a topical piece. So at this point in my career, I can trust myself. I have a little rubric that I make for myself, a rewriting rubric I use before I send anything out. I think everyone should have it, and you can gear it towards your own weaknesses. If you know you have a tendency to put jokes in the middle of paragraphs, your rubric would say something like, set my jokes free. Put a paragraph break in so your joke ends a line, so it's easy to see. If you know that you have a tendency to kind of peter out, you could say your rewriting rubric could be highlight everything that's absurd, so you kind of can't let yourself off the hook submitting a piece that doesn't end on a joke. Come on now. So if you have time, send it to someone who you trust. It could even be, you know, someone who's not a writer. I have, you know, my youngest sister who I love. She's super smart. She watches a lot of comedy. She does not work in comedy. So in some ways, she's the ideal person to run a concept by, because she'll either say, yeah, that's funny, or I don't get it. And in some ways, that's all the feedback you need. If you're in a writing group or you have someone who you want to do a gut check with, say it's, you know, you're writing about a harsh topic, something that people have a lot of feelings about. It might be good to get a read on that. But if you're like, I know this topic, it's part of my beat, especially for like actual journalists like Omar and other people who might be in this room. I am not a journalist. If you actually specialize in something, then you might not need that check. But yeah, you want this mental space, take a shower, do some squats, do anything to change your point of view, print out the piece, just try to see it with fresh eyes because you need to submit it pretty fast. And then the last step is if you're going to link to any research, which typically people do in these types of pieces, you at least link to the story that the topical satires are riffing off of. You can put those hyperlinks in, and we use reputable sources. We'll talk about that in a moment.
Caitlin, I'm just going to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Dua had a clarification question. She said it's not just writing with urgency, right? You also have to edit and submit with urgency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dua, but you.
Okay.
You only have when you have this short time period. We'll get to a slide on submission, but yeah, a lot of email websites will have emails just for topicals where the editors will review it that day. So you want to be sending out something that if it's marked topical, it truly is topical, that they know, like, let me drop everything to read this. Because again, they might be evaluating something that could get a ton of reads. All right, that's our process. Those are the 12 steps. I'm going to show you a slide where you can screenshot them. A good story to work with, just briefly. You want to pick a story that enough people know about. So obviously, if you're in like a subgroup that has, or a local paper and you think it would do really well with a local group of people, do it. But most stories that run on like major sites like McSweeney's will be like a national or international story. So if you see things trending on social, that's fine, but check your facts. Do not pull something off Twitter and assume it is good. Again, we always want to connect to that point of view. Don't just choose something because you're like, oh, everyone's talking about this story, but I don't care. Don't waste your time. There's so many things you could care about. Choose a story that you understand. You don't always have to understand like everything, but you know, obviously there's a developing situation going on in Lebanon. If you don't understand the intricacies of that region, you should probably not be trying to write comedy about it, because it's a terrible situation, and anyone who brings like a sort of satirical eye to it should have a very deep understanding of like what this means in a broader context. This is also where I think you should ask yourself, why am I the person to write on this topic? Because you're not always, right? Am I the person who should be speaking about this? That's something I ask myself all the time. And sometimes I have a great idea, but the answer is no. And I might give the idea to someone else, or I might reach out to someone who I think could do a great job and say like, hey, I saw this story. I think you'd be great at it. But do a gut check, right? Like, we don't need your voice on every topic, but some topics it is essential. And those are the topics that you should be writing on. Good story has lots of details like we talked about. It can be developing in like what we talked about. Like, we don't know yet like what the colleges will do, but not like when the Mueller report dropped in the US in 2019 on a Friday, you weren't going to write something that night. Like, people needed time to parse through that. And you can always use a quote at the top to situate a reader. You can always like cherry pick the quote that you're riffing off of, especially if it's like a very certain language, like love in the pod. If we decided to go with that, I would put that quote at the top so the reader has the same information as me. All right, this is the slide. I know you're thinking, whoa, that's too much text, but this is the slide for you to screenshot. I've repeated the whole process here, and I put in estimated times. So, you know, if one stage takes you way longer, like, don't bug out. This is just suggested to show you like where the bulk of your time should go. And you're gonna see that it's in the conception, right? It's not actually writing the piece. You should be putting the bulk of your time into the conception stage, because a badly conceived piece cannot be fixed by rewriting, but a great conception can be fixed with editing and rewriting and outside eyes. And again, tweak this to how it works for you. You might not, I'm trying to think what I would cut out. You might be someone whose brain is like a little faster than mine, and maybe you can skip just from reading stories to brainstorming titles. Maybe you don't have to do the inner stuff. I personally think it's good because, again, it feeds your jokes, but do whatever works for you. I'm not here to say there's only one method. This is a method that's worked for me and other people I've worked with. Tweak it so that it works for you. Okay, where to submit? So McSweeney's has a lot of topical satire that gets a ton of reads. It has a dedicated email for those submissions. So if it's truly topical, again, not coronavirus in general, but it had to be something that happened that day, you can write it and submit to that email, and you'll hear back within a day, which is like pretty cool, right? To get editorial feedback that fast. So the Belladonna, which is a site that I co-founded that now has 6 amazing new editors, they do topical pieces as well, and so do a variety of other sites. So I put a list of those in your tip sheet along with like their rules for submission. Some are open submission, some you have to be a contributor. But yeah, just there's a bunch of places with different angles that you can submit to. You can double submit a topical piece just because it has to be picked up that day, but you must let every editor know. And if it gets picked up, you immediately have to let the other places know, because otherwise you're saying like, do this work.
Should you let them know where it's also being submitted, or is that too TMI?
You don't have to. Yeah, you could just say, because this is topical, I have submitted it to 3 other outlets, and I will be in touch with you about the status.
Yeah. And
check them out on the tip sheet. All right, so just briefly our challenges and rewards. Challenges, you have to do it super fast. This is a kind of writing that rewards people who can write clean and short, and people who have, that's why the feeling is important. Like, if you, based off your lived experience, like have an incredibly strong feeling or belief about a topic, you're gonna stick to your point of view. You're not like gonna waver in a way that makes it unclear what the piece is saying. So I think it like helps for people to have a general beat. Again, even if you're not a journalist, like Omar, I know you actually are a journalist, but like, what are some topics that you would feel like would be within your wheelhouse to like very quickly dash off some topical satire, like 2 or 3?
Yeah, I mean, I think I am in a position to maybe do something about Lebanon. I'm Lebanese. I'm aware of just like the kind of tyranny of incompetence that that country's been living under, and what has led to this. I don't know if it might be a too soon kind of thing. But I mean, that's one, just sort of in general, Middle Eastern politics is maybe something that I feel a little bit more equipped to do, at least for the English speaking world.
And that is something I don't think a lot of people could do.
Yeah. Media criticism, maybe another one.
Yes, I love it. And those pieces tend to do pretty well because people in the media love to read shit talking about other people in the media.
And maybe like some general millennial parenting bullshit.
Honestly, parenting pieces on McSweeney's go viral all the time. So if you have some millennial parenting bullshit, by all means, do it. I have some topics I return to again and again, gender politics, sexual assault, there are things I already have done a breadth of reading on. So to me, I feel comfortable wading into those waters if news breaks. I feel like I have the context in order to like write a piece that is not like going to be inadvertently offensive. But yeah, it was great to hear yours as well. All right. So again, the challenge is you have to do it real fast, and you have to do it with intention, and you have to be confident in your voice. Again, I put like, why is your voice needed? But I do think like this is a form a lot of people have broken in on, like Carlos, because it's almost like they get moved to create, to be like artsy. They see the news and they know they have a take on it, and all of a sudden, like maybe the things they've been struggling with in their comedic writing, they're able to quickly conceive. Like they can jump over those because their point of view and their take is so strong. So I personally love writing this way. There's a lot of adrenaline. It's a great way to get clips and to get widely read clips. Also, topical satire pieces are very often collected and put into like straight newsletters because they're a way of commenting on the news that isn't just like linking to another news story. So I've had pieces I've written like LinkedIn, parenting websites and just all these different journalist newsletters. And so it's a cool way to kind of make your name and have people know you, and just have a good time, honestly. Like some of you might be anxious from this process. You might be watching this like, oh no, I hate it. I teach a class with a great writer and editor named Alyssa Bassist, where she teaches evergreen humor and I teach topical satire. And students tend to be like, no, I want to take a while to like reflect on like the eye of my piece and write humor. And then I get the ones who are like, yeah, let's break it down. Let's go nuts, an hour. I love it. I want to feel alive. So yeah, like if this is not your bag, that's fine. But I think it's good to know how to do it in case like the perfect story ever emerges and you're like, you're Neo, you're the one. Like you have to be the one to write it. All right. This is our last slide. See ya. Thanks for coming. Again, I think this is a great way for people to sometimes get that first big clip. I love topical satire. I think seeing the way someone's brain works to take the news and like change it into comedy or have another take on it, I think is really important and valid. It's cool and smart. Wow. A way to get your voice out and POV out in the world. Again, especially if you're someone whose voice and point of view have not been highly represented on a certain topic, I would truly encourage you to try this. And I think it's fun. But yeah, thank you so much for paying attention. I know it was a fast and furious 90 minutes.
It was. Thank you so much. That was amazing. I'm going to ask everyone, please, to applaud Caitlin by clicking the applause and the reactions button below so that we can see it. I mean, I would unmute you all and then but that would be chaos. It might actually break the internet. I'm not sure how that works.
Thank you for this flood of emojis. I will feast on them.
All right, feast on those emojis. Caitlin, can I get you to move to the next slide, or actually just, you could stop share your screen. That way we can get some more FaceTime here for question period. And then I'm going to get Christina Legowski. That's all right. Christina Legowski is going to have the first question. You can, turn your share screen off.
Okay, there we go.
There we go. Okay, Christina, go ahead.
Yeah, so there was a news item. about a month ago, maybe, about Oakville police described a hate crime that had occurred in Oakville, which is a very sort of sleepy suburb outside of Toronto. And somebody had written, "This is a Nazi war memorial" on a statue in a cemetery. And as it turns out, it was a memorial to a battalion of Ukrainian soldiers that had served with the SS. And so basically what the person who had, done this graffiti, they were basically just labeling it for what it was. But the Oakville police were investigating it as a like a hate crime. So, and I thought, well, that would be like something, worth writing something about, because not only, was my late mother a Holocaust survivor, but I also lived in Oakville. So I know it's a very white town, and not a lot of Jews, not a lot of Holocaust survivors. So, but my question is, how do you go about doing this so that you don't like offend people and, and you don't get sued? Because that's,
or
yeah.
for satire.
Yeah, so you are protected by satire, but you're always going to offend some people, unfortunately. Well, fortunately, I don't really care, but there's always going to be people who don't like what you wrote. And to me, that's actually a sign that you did it right, because you expressed a clear point of view. If you stand behind the point of view that like we can like labeling history accurately as a hate crime, if that's your point of view, or is not a hate crime, then like you need to stand behind that. You will get some people who disagree with you, but that's where like point of view comes in and becomes like really important. So I would encourage you to sit down and think like, what do you feel or believe about this? I'll point out that story is not topical anymore, but I think you could turn it into a piece. I think it could be part of a larger satire piece about obviously we're having a lot of discussion in the US about, our statues and the way we represent history. And actually the John Oliver episode this week was on like how history is taught in the United States. So I think that's actually part of a larger conversation that's going on. So you could maybe make the case that it's topical for that reason. But I would start with your point of view. I would start with the specifics of that. You're gonna have to move away from reality there. Like, I don't think making a bunch of jokes about the Holocaust is probably going to get your point across. I think you're going to have to find some sort of like comedic analogy to use. So if you look on McSweeney's, they do a lot of pieces. Carlos Greaves, again, has been writing about coronavirus, but through the guise of Jurassic Park. So he's commenting on what's going on in the US, but he's using the ineptitude from the administrators at Jurassic Park to criticize the ineptitude of the US government. So I would sit down and do a cluster and think about who is your target. Is it, the way that the people acted in that town? Is it the police department? Is it the labeling of it as a hate crime? And then think like, is there some sort of fictional analogy I can make? How can I take this out of reality by comparing it to something else? Because I think we always want to kind of move away from the Holocaust literally, but we can definitely use satire to talk about it in a way where people reflect and think like, oh yeah, that's just actually what happened. That's not a hate crime. That's literally saying the thing that occurred. Oh, sorry, you're muted, Christina.
Thank you. Okay, thanks so much for your question, Christina. Appreciate it. And thanks for that answer. I'm going to now bring in Samantha. Samantha McCabe has a question for you. Samantha, you there? I think her mic might not be working, so I could ask it for her.
Okay.
Her question is, and I have the same question actually, was when pitching these stories. Oh, Sam, you there?
You're.
There she is.
Hi, Sam.
Hi, sorry, I think that was an AirPods malfunction. Thank you so much for the seminar and for making Omar do something for once. It was really nice.
Hey, come on. I listen.
For sure. I'm just looking for a little bit more clarity on pitching, because I imagine it kind of diverges from traditional journalism a little bit, especially in that phenomenal response time. But I'm wondering, when you're pitching these stories, what does that look like? Are you pitching headlines, or are you attaching entire articles on spec? And since it is such a quick turnaround and you're trying to maybe make a living freelancing, are you pitching multiple stories at once?
Good question. So first off, I'm going to tell you that freelance humor writing, you're not going to make a living doing it. So it's more like, it's more like something you do to raise your profile and like get more eyes on your work and bylines. I mean, McSweeney's pays $30 a piece. The New Yorker's $3.25. But like people aren't getting on the New Yorker like numerous times a month. What you do send the entire piece. So you have to write the whole thing on spec. I almost always pitch McSweeney's for my topical stuff because I like their audience. They're widely read. I tend to write more in their tone. So what I would do is I would send the entire piece in an email following their submission guidelines. If they take it, great. It goes up usually the next day. If they don't take it, then I would send to the new editors at the Belladonna. And then if they don't take it, I would put it on my own Medium page. So I kind of have like because it's so fast, like you said, like almost like a triage system where I'm like, here's preferred outlet, but like, here's what's happening right after that. Because yeah, you have to write the whole thing. And there's really, if you're a contributor to a site like Reductress or The Onion, they do pitches, but that requires going through the contributor trial first. So if you're a freelancer or someone just trying to be on one of the bigger websites, you send the whole piece. If you're a contributor, an established contributor to an existing site, you send headlines every single week.
Got it. Thank you so much. Super helpful.
Welcome.
Okay, thank you. That was great. Lucy, go ahead. You should be unmuted.
Can y'all hear me now? Great.
Hi.
Hi, Caitlin. Question for you. If you have an evergreen piece pending with McSweeney's or a site like that now, can you also then pitch them a timely piece, or is that considered a multiple submission?
You can do both.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
I've done both. Yeah, because they'll accept and it could be 2 or 3 weeks. And in the meantime, you have, you know, a great idea and you write it up. Like definitely you can do both. Yeah, you can. So at any given time there, you can have a piece in the regular queue and a piece in the topical queue.
Perfect. Thank you.
Welcome.
Well, that was fast. I didn't even have time to queue the next person up. Kara, go ahead.
Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, Kara.
How are you?
We're in book club together.
Yeah, book club. Anyway, so thank you for doing this. Omar, thank you for doing this. This is awesome. So you kind of answered this, but maybe you can expand on it. You know, after you sit with the piece and you're like knee deep in it, like you kind of lose perspective, I think.
Yeah. Like
how can you just make sure that your POV is like clear and it just makes sense, and you know, because you're just like, I guess, how can you not lose your perspective?
Yeah, I go through line by line and I apply my point of view to every single joke, which yeah, isn't like fun or sexy in the end stages, but like if my point of view is that like college administrations think they're going to solve coronavirus via more administration, then I look at every single joke. And so looking at that, like I gave the example of like my air conditioner, that probably actually doesn't fit my point of view because it has nothing to do with the college administration and how I feel about what they're doing. So that's where I actually end up in editing, like removing a bunch of jokes. I've written pieces where I have to, you know, I've written 20 jokes in the piece. I remove 9 of them in the rewrite, and then I have to add 3 more. So I would say like in that drafting stage, the editing stage, like the best thing you can do is cut huge amounts of jokes, honestly. Because I try to always have a joke I call the North Star joke. That's the joke that like most clearly encapsulates the point of view. And then you can kind of hold every other joke up to your North Star joke. And if you're like, well, this one is clearly about like administrative forms around, you know, the pod's intimacy situation, and this one is about the NCAA, you're like, no, that's my North Star joke. This one's not in the same galaxy. It has to go away. Thank you. Oh, Omar, you're muted.
Everyone's muted. So sorry. Okay, Erland has a question. Erland, I've unmuted you. You should be able to ask it.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hi, Erland.
Thank you so much. This has been very helpful, very interesting with this 12-step
Oh,
process.
good.
If I'm unclear in any way, I'm calling in from Oslo, Norway, so feel free to ask for clarification if I'm saying something in a weird way. I actually have a two-part question, one about sort of the process of the satirist writing topical satire and more of a practical writing question. Should I take both at once or?
Yeah, hit me. Do it, Erlen.
Yeah, all right. So I was writing satire for as a freelance writer for radio around the time of this terrorist in Norway with Breivik and this thing happening in Utøya.
Yeah.
And I really felt this sort of getting overwhelmed with all of the negativity that came into like you constantly reading the news and sort of getting a lot of sort of burnout and fatigue, trying to just sort of find the positive spin and trying to sort of there was like an emotional disconnect for me almost. That I find really hard working with topical satire continuously. So I was wondering if you have any suggestions on how to cope with that. That's my first question. And the other one was on the heightening of a premise and sort of making it like that doesn't necessarily make it funny. So how do you sort of gauge the level of brevity, and do you have any tips on doing that? I had one of the sort of the most popular satirists in Norway had a really strange rant that he did that just sort of fell flat because he was using the N-word on live radio, and he was trying to sort of put together there was something about the intelligence of climate deniers, and that was a problem. That he was trying to. Did
it only fall flat? Like fall flat doesn't seem like the.
Yes, seems like should have been worse than that.
He got a huge backlash because he ended up with some monkey noises and stuff. But he managed.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he didn't get canceled, which was kind of weird.
Let me dive into these. Okay, so first off, I don't think that's the goal of satire, especially responding to like really horrific events, should necessarily has to be lightness. I don't think satire always has to be light and that it like gives you a lighter feeling. I think you can conceive of lightness as like shining a light onto an element of it that people may not have thought of. So actually some of my favorite satire is sad satire. And the kind of the gold standard for that would be the Onion's 9/11 issue. Have you ever read that? So the Onion moved to New York in early September, and their very first issue they ever put out was right after the September 11th attacks in 2001. So the pieces in that issue, I would encourage you to read the whole thing. They run the gamut of tones, right? Like there's one piece called Unsure What to Do, American Woman Bakes an American Flag Cake. And it's just like this beautiful piece about the point of view is like, we feel helpless and we don't know what to do. Then there's that classic piece, God angrily clarifies don't kill rule. So that one obviously was more angry. So the Alexander Petri piece I mentioned earlier during the Kavanaugh hearings is sad. So I would say like, I remember the Norway shooter, like that's not funny. You're not gonna find a funny take on that. I think you can talk about, you can lean into your sadness, like the fact that like a country that does not have that happen very often has been shattered. Like your illusion of safety has been shattered. In some ways, I would say you could maybe even you could think about how Americans must feel like, because we have this happen all the time, and maybe like come up with some sort of like care guide from an American for getting used to dealing with this. Then your target would be something like going after American politicians, but people would understand reading that piece, like what you're really saying is like, this is a horrific, not normal thing for your country. So I would encourage you to seek out, look at the Onion, and look back at Alexander Petri's work and look at the pieces that are not funny. Look at the ones that are really coming from a place of like devastation and sadness. I would encourage that everyone would do that. Everyone do that, because it's really like a way of looking at the form in a new way. Satire does not always have to elicit laughter. It can elicit disgust and anger. And I've cried reading pieces because they felt so resonant in a way that like a straight news story did not, because they were suffused with the emotions and the anger and the disappointment and sadness of the writer. And then for your second question, so, I mean, there's a lot going on in that question. Heightening of premise. I personally think the easiest way to do it is to heighten into absurdity. So I would argue that why that piece didn't, or that radio interview didn't work, is because that person was actually just calling back to literal racism, like literal actual racist tropes. So it's not absurd because it's real. And something super important, I'm gonna address everyone now in this room. Ironic racism is still racism, right? Ironic classism is still classism. Ironic sexism is still sexism. So if you're just repeating actual like virulent, terrible things, you're giving them a platform. You haven't done anything to change people's minds. The wrong people are going to be laughing at that. You should always, like, kind of going back to Kara's question, one of the last things I ask myself is, would the wrong person, like someone I disagree with who I think is ethically wrong, like this piece? Because if they would, you need to make changes. So I think the immediate gut reaction I had to what you said is that like the wrong kind of person would laugh at that. They would find that like callback to earlier disgusting racist tropes funny and like nice and something that felt good. And so by taking a different turn and like flipping things into something that's never existed, like going outside of the bounds of history and reality, you're taking away the opportunity for people to be like, oh yeah, I actually think all that racist shit is funny. So like, again, like I would read pieces with an eye toward like, how are they leaving reality as opposed to trying to like call back on previous things? How are they like escalating to previously unknown realms? But thank you for those questions. They were both really, really good.
Great, yeah. And now you don't want you want to ask yourself, would the wrong person laugh at this?
Mm-hmm.
That's different from the wrong person mistaking it for real news, right? Like, is that, do you want to avoid that? Or is that something that you're just like, I have no control over that? I've written a little bit of satire, like something that was like anti-car culture from the perspective of someone who was like very crazy about their car and roads and getting to places the way they want, from where they want, always on time, in a hurry. And I published that, and most people got it, but like I got like a letter from a reader who was just like, yeah, thanks for like sticking it to those cyclists.
Oh no. Yeah, I think you can't always determine, obviously you can't live in everyone's head, and you can't determine how they're going to read a certain thing. And so like you need to make it as clear as possible, but like Alexander Petrie wrote this piece in 2017 called like Trump's Awesome Budget, and it was about like spending all the money on bald eagles. And someone at the White House thought that was real and put it in his press packet. And like, that's not, like, you can't guard against that. But I think sometimes people try to be too sly. Like they want to like trick you into reading the piece. I kind of remember the school of thought of like, go hard in the title. Like, let's make it clear what we're doing. There have been some unfortunate incidences at college satirical newspapers. So younger writers, this young woman, I believe she's at Georgia Tech, like wrote something about like how she was there to get an MRS degree, so a Mrs. degree. And kind of relating back to Erlin's question, people then like flamed her because they were like, why are you at Georgia Tech if that's what you want? And she had been trying to say like, that's not why she was there, but because that's a real thing people used in the past, that acronym, it didn't read as absurd. So if she had used an acronym like a doctor of like being a boss bitch who lives at home and cooks 24/7, that's obviously fake. So she could have made her point without this like poor young lady being like dragged over the internet by people who, some people didn't understand, but I will say there was also some willful misunderstanding because obviously it was a college satirical paper and like not a professional thing in the Washington Post. So when in doubt, I would say go bigger rather than smaller. Better to be too absurd than to be misunderstood. So people think, especially if you're writing opposite point of view,
right.
They're like,
and
oh my God.
Especially if your venue is not one that is known for satire.
Yes, exactly.
Like McSweeney's is very different than satire that runs in L, or the New Yorker for that matter.
even this year, someone published a piece on McSweeney's called like F. Scott Fitzgerald, like pandemic summer that was made up. And people were like, oh, wow, Fitzgerald had they were like putting it in real papers as like a thing.
Good Lord.
But that's just all of us not being media literate.
Okay. JJ has a question. This actually kind of folds into Erlen's question a little bit. So JJ, go ahead.
Hi. I was wondering, like, sort of about evergreen topics, like say white supremacy or patriarchy, or your example of school shootings. Like, if it's not something that has happened, like there's no real topical news item yet, but you know that these things occur. Do you like save them? Like, if you have an idea, do you like write it and save it, or do you pitch anyways?
That's a good question. So no, I wouldn't pitch anyway, because that's a trend. That's not like a thing in the news. But I think that can become part of your beat. So like JJ, if you read about a topic a lot, you can gather all this stuff as context, and I would put them in a document and start to kind of draft it out. And then, unfortunately, we absolutely will have another school shooting in the US. So, I mean, that's horrific, but I absolutely know it will happen. So if I've read a lot on it and I had an idea one day, I can start to like prep the piece and like put some thoughts in there. You can like almost pre-brainstorm your thoughts and feelings around certain topics. But for a topical piece, you do have to wait for that news peg, that thing occurring where you can tie it directly into that. Or you could just write an evergreen piece. Like there's no shade in like writing a piece that's just submitted in a normal 2-week process that applies more to a trend than a specific thing. Those pieces actually will end up, they'll be reposted every time something happens, but they're not, because they're not tied to one specific thing, they'll have a much longer shelf life. So you could do pre-brainstorming, or you could tie to the evergreen trend.
Okay. So I have, like, for example, I have an idea and I'm not sure if it's particularly evergreen or not. So I'll just give you as an example. If I don't know if you know the Alison Roman controversy.
Yeah, no, I know it.
Yeah, so I had an idea of writing like an article on like, or just like something about like ethnic foods as kind of like explained by like a white person like her, like, just like really simple things, but like explained in an Alison Roman way. And it's kind of, it's not topical anymore, but I feel like it's sort of evergreen. Do you think something like that?
Yeah, so the Alison Roman thing is not topical. What you're actually referring to is the trend. Like, I mean, if anyone watches Baited with Z-Way, that Instagram show, yes, okay, I see Nicole Erb nodding. So she said to her, do you consider yourself the Christopher Columbus of spices, or of like food blogs? Basically implying that she like co-ops people's culture and then like whitewashes it. I think you're speaking to a larger trend. Like obviously it was with Alison Roman, but it also came up in the Bon Appetit kitchen when we found out that many of the people of color who worked in that show were not being paid for their on-camera experiences. So what you're actually want to write is an evergreen piece about like a series of things that have occurred in the food writing world. So I wouldn't tie it to a topical peg, actually. I think that piece would benefit from responding to like years of this kind of stuff. Like it's not, you're making the case, it's not this one woman. She's, a symptom, not the disease. You want to go after the disease in that case. Yeah, I think that could be really funny. Like, obviously, we know Alison Roman and chickpeas, but if you're talking about, someone trying to explain salt, someone trying to explain, like, you could pick so many, like, basic ingredients, or you could go the opposite way and pick foods that are, like, incredibly associated with one culture and have them make the blandest, whitest version of them and give it, like, a totally dumb name. So there's a couple ways you could do it, but I actually think you'd be stronger doing that as an evergreen piece, because I think it could be super highly shared across like several different spheres of media.
I love it. Yesterday I saw roasted eggplant dip with naan bread on a menu, and I almost lodged a human rights complaint. Bruce Tang.
Hi, speaking from London. Hi, hello.
Hi, Bruce.
Hey. I write, but I also illustrate, and I was wondering,
yes.
do you have any advice for writing satire alongside illustrations? As in, are there any particular nuances that are specific to this format? And do you know any places that take those kind of submissions? Thank you.
Great
Thanks, Bruce.
question.
And I just want to say, I think that's the last question we're going to have time for. So I just want to thank everyone for all the questions there, and also for speculating about whether I'm wearing pants or not. But okay, you can,
Yeah.
let's, yeah.
Omar, save the chat transcript. I want to read it. So great question. I wish I could illustrate. Bruce, you're multi-hyphenate. I love it. I have worked with an illustrator as a writer. So Daily Shouts in the New Yorker publishes tons of illustrated pieces, and they'll pay like $3.25. And you can submit those through, there's an open email for anyone to use. It takes 90 days, which sucks, but once you get onto Shouts and Murmurs once, you're able to correspond directly with the editor. So after that, you can get potentially faster acceptances. So McSweeney's also does some stuff that combines illustration and written work. Since you're doing both, I don't know, I can't speak to this that much because I've never been in the frame of mind of like conceptualizing both. I know as a writer, if I'm writing a piece where it's a short list and it feels like I'm writing one-line jokes that would benefit from being visual, here, I'll share, I love to just share pieces. I'll share a piece that I wrote earlier this year with someone. His name is Dan Caprera. He does a lot of visual comedy. And so what he did was, we were talking about wanting to do something with like, I had noticed this thing called Churchillian drift, where whenever like someone doesn't know who said a quote that seems profound or like colonialist, they attribute it to Winston Churchill. So we were like, let's like come up with some absolutely batshit quotes and attribute them to Winston Churchill. And because Dan is a visual designer, he was like, I actually think it would be super funny if we could create them as like these quote blocks for online and see if people would share them as real things. So if you look at this example, like we wrote a lot of these jokes together, but then he designed them. And to me, the design is almost the funniest thing of this piece. Like I had the idea earlier and I'd written out the jokes and I was like, oh, they're just quotes. Like they're not that funny. But once you superimpose them on top of Churchill's face, all of a sudden they like take on a whole other like comedic charge. So I would say like conceptually, like, you know, a lot of the pieces I gave as examples are the language is the thing that's funny. Like they're making, you know, Carlos's piece is making fun of another book. So seeing his like parody of it written out is funny. But if you're parodying something that's visual, or you're like, I mean, Dan, you should look at Dan Caprera's work. He makes like all these visual graphs. He uses visuals and satire in a way that like no one else does. He's a fantastic writer. So like you have a skill that a lot of us don't have in this field. So I would encourage you from the very beginning to like be brainstorming premises that are based off visuals. So with you, when you start to do your forms, as opposed to like speech, you know, list of quotes, playlists, I might think like, what are some visual things I could use to structure this piece? Is it like a slideshow of vacation photos? Is it stick figures? Is it, you know, a sex ed poster? And like kind of fold that element into your brainstorming so the visual side is built in from the very beginning.
Awesome. Thank you
Thanks,
so
Bruce.
much. Thanks, Bruce, for the great question. Thanks, everyone, for your great questions. If anybody wants more time with Professor Kunkel, you could follow her at Kunkeltron. You could book her for virtual mentorship. She's available along with most of our other instructors through the website at pandemicuniversity.com/one-on-ones. You could also buy her book from the campus store, courtesy of Glass Bookshop at pandemicuniversity.com/shop.